Good evening, everyone. I will I welcome you all to this session today. Today we are conducting a Pragnavaridhi lecture series. Today we have Vaidya Shivaprasad sir. Sir will be teaching about male and female reproductive system and the endocrine glands. Before that, I'll give brief introduction about Panchajanya. Panchajanya, the divine conch of Bhagavan Sri Krishna, which one blown during Kurukshetra, indicating the start of Dharma Yuddha that followed. There all the efforts were done for the establishment of Dharma. Dharma was kept over personal relations and motives. Keeping the same motive in mind, our organization will work towards establishing the importance and necessity of following and imbibing the culture, accepting our roots and making people realize the true essence of Ayurveda, not only as a treatment modality but also as a way of life. All these while walking in the path of Dharma, hence the motto Shreyam Bharatiyam, Arogyam Ayurvediyam. The founders of this organization started this because we felt the need to spread the knowledge of Bharatiya culture, Ayurveda, and its values to all strata of people in every corner of the world. Also, the founders being Ayurveda aspirants, now the inside out of today's medical field, hence they aim to make people aware of this and also try their best to solve this on the go. In order for all this to be achieved, we have set up various wings with working principles and objectives that help achieve the goals faster and easier in the coming years. They are Team Swami Vivekananda, Team Ashwins, Team Veda Vyasa, Team Sanjaya and Nalanda. Coming back to the members in our organization, we have doctors, healthcare workers, teachers, students, and people from almost every single occupation available aiming at working together and bringing forward the true essence of Bharat and her traditions. So, all those who fit under these categories are welcomed with honor and privilege. Today we have Vaidya Shivaprasad Chiplunkar sir. Sir presently working as the head of department and professor department of Kriya Shareera, Government Ayurveda Medical College, Bengaluru. Sir has worked as the professor and HOD at SDM Bengaluru and SDM Hassan formerly. Sir has a working experience of 17 years. Sir is a member of Board of Studies BHU Varanasi presently and formerly a member of Board of Studies RGUHS Bengaluru. Sir is a recognized PG guide in RGUHS Bengaluru. Sir has authored the textbook of Kriya Shareera in Chaukamba Prakashan Publications. We are very glad to have you in this session, sir. You can start the session now, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction.
Thank you, sir.
A very good evening. A very good evening to everybody assembled here. Dr. Shivaprasad Chiplunkar, and today we'll be discussing a few things regarding the male and female reproductive system and the endocrinology, endocrine glands. So, in our first year physiology syllabus or Kriyashareera syllabus, the reproductive system, this comes in your paper 2, paper 1, part B. So, both of these questions come in two different papers, but we study them together because reproductive system is also in a great way related. Ovary and testes themselves are an endocrine glands. Studying these two things together clubbed in one particular subject. So next slide, please. So the science of, before we get into the science of endocrinology, we are, we are looking at different glands. We are looking at different glands that will be secreting substances in the body. Now these glands will be secreting certain chemical messengers. These messengers are responsible for chemical signaling, the signaling of the gland, signaling of the muscle, signaling of the different biomarkers. Various things in the body will be signaled chemically with the help of these that are secreted from various glands. So roughly we divide the glands into two, that is an endocrine gland and exocrine glands. Endocrine glands are those glands that secrete their secretion directly into the blood, that is in the capillaries. As you can see in the picture here, the exocrine glands are those that secrete their secretion through a duct, to their target area, whereas in the endocrine gland it will be secreted directly into the blood, which will reach the target area through the blood circulation. The different exocrine glands, they are divided into three different types. Next slide, the two slides ahead. Based on the type of secretion, the various type of exocrine glands are: number one, it is the holocrine glands. These are the type of exocrine glands where the cell membrane of the cell ruptures off during the secretion of the chemical messengers, as in the case of sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands are the various sebum secreting glands that are present in the body. Mesocrine glands, these are the glands where the cells secrete their substance in the form of exocytosis. That is, here no damage has been done, thus directly it's secreted into the exterior. Examples are the salivary glands. And another type of the exocrine glands are the apocrine glands, where the portion of the cell membrane containing the hormone buds off during the secretion of the hormone. That is, the cell gets damaged here. Next slide, please. One of the example for the apocrine glands are there are two types of sweat glands, eccrine and apocrine glands. The apocrine glands are an example, are a type of sweat glands that, now in this picture we can see that here this is the mesocrine gland, an example is the salivary gland. It's also connected to the exterior. Whereas in an apocrine gland, where here we can see that a part of a cell is pinched off during the secretion, and in a holocrine gland we can see that the cell disintegrates and the secretion will be moved to the outside. So these are the three different type of exocrine glands that are a part of the study of the glands. Next slide, please. Now the secretions of the endocrine glands, we divide them into three different types. That is, one is the first type of hormones are the hormones of the peptides or protein hormones, that are protein derivatives. Examples of these are the most of the hormones in the body, that is the pituitary hormones, calcitonin, insulin. Majority of the hormones in the body belong to this type, that is the peptide hormones. The second type of the endocrine hormones are the derivatives of the amino acid tyrosine, that is the thyroid hormones, catecholamines. Catecholamines are the secretions of medulla. The dopamines, they belong to a type of hormones that are made out of amino acid tyrosine. Hence, they are the second class. The steroids are those hormones that are the lipid derivatives. Examples for these lipid derivatives are the glucocorticoids, the mineralocorticoids, and the estrogen. The majority of them are all the protein hormones. The second different varieties are the steroid hormones, and little lesser so we can say that these are the three different type of hormones. Based on their where they act. Next slide, please. Based on where they act, we can again divide hormones into different types. Okay. So before studying into the different hormones and endocrinology, let us deal with the reproductive system. The reproductive system, we divide this into we'll be studying this under two headings. That is, one is the male reproductive system, and another one is the female reproductive system. Male reproductive system consists of the primary gonad. Gonad is an organ that is going to secrete a gamete, that is a testis. Testis is the primary gonad, whereas the other accessory organs of the male reproductive system. They include the epididymis, they include the vas deferens, the prostate gland, seminal vesicle, bulbourethral gland, and the urethra that we are seeing here in the picture. Next slide, please. So the primary, next slide, the primary reproductive organ here is the test that secretes that secretes the gamete. Let us briefly look into the structure of the testis here. A testis is made up of three coverings or three layers, three tunics: tunica vasculosa, tunica albuginea, and tunica vaginalis. Internally, a testis is made up of about 900 seminiferous tubules. Seminiferous tubules are the structures which are responsible for the production of the sperms. These 900 seminiferous tubules are arranged in about roughly 200 to 300 lobules. Here, each of the lobule may contain 1 to 4 seminiferous tubules. So these lobules will be containing the different seminiferous tubules inside that. And inside the seminiferous tubules, we will be having a germinal epithelium that will be responsible for the production of the sperms. Next slide, please. Now, these seminiferous tubules, now they will be lined by these seminiferous tubules. They'll be lined by three different type of cells. That is one Leydig cells, one is the Sertoli cells, and one is the germinal cells. Now here, once these cells will be secreting the sperms and the semen, this will be moving through this pathway, that is firstly through the seminiferous tubules, going into the vas efferents, from there into the epididymis, from there into the prostate empties its secretion along with the seminal vesicles into the ejaculatory duct, and this will be getting into the urethra, which will be ejaculated out. Next slide, please. Now here, when we look into the three different class of cells that are present in the test, Leydig cells, if we can look at the picture here, they are present outside the seminiferous tubules. They are present in the interstitial space between the seminiferous tubules. And the primary function of Leydig cells is to secrete testosterone. And this testosterone that is secreted from the Leydig cells will be responsible for the spermatogenesis. Here we can see a relationship here between the testis and the pituitary gland. That is the luteinizing hormone that is secreted from the posterior pituitary, from the anterior pituitary. This will be responsible for the stimulating the Leydig cells that will be secreting the testosterone that will be responsible for the pituitary gland and the testis. The luteinizing hormone has one more name called as interstitial cell stimulating hormone. In the males, the luteinizing hormone is called as interstitial cell stimulation, to stimulate the Leydig cells in order to secrete the testosterone. Second type of cells that is present here in the testis, in the histology of the testis, is the Sertoli cells. These Sertoli cells are present inside the seminiferous tubules. The Leydig cells are present outside, whereas these seminiferous tubules, inside them, they will be containing the Sertoli cells. The primary function of the Sertoli cells is to secrete ABP. ABP is the androgen binding protein that is responsible for the transportation of the testosterone. And nourishment to the maturing germ cells. Now, what are the maturing germ cells? Yeah, that develop into mature spermatogoa. They are the maturing germ cells. The Sertoli cells are responsible for the nourishment of them, and along with that, in fetus, they are responsible for secretion of MRF. MRF is the Mullerian regression factor, which is, and cells are also responsible for the blood testis barrier. Just like we have a blood brain barrier, which is responsible for the protection of the internal structures of the brain, we have a blood testis barrier, which is due to the tight junctions that are present between the Sertoli cells. So this is a protective function that is given by the Sertoli cells. Next slide, please. So here we can see that many times any disturbance that itself may be a reason for the infertility, because testosterone may be secreted from the body, but the transportation and the testosterone requires the androgen binding protein that is present here in the Sertoli cells. When we look at some of the accessory reproductive organs, we saw that the sperms are getting produced in the testis, where in the germ cells. In the germ cells, they will be undergoing the process of spermatogenesis. Spermatogenesis means they'll be from the immature spermatozoa, they'll be developing into a mature sperm, and this will be secreted into the vas efferents. From the epididymis, they'll be going into the vas deferens. So until here, it is only the sperms that will be present, which hardly is about 10% of the total secretion. The majority of the secretion here comes from two structures. That is, one is the seminal vesicle and another one is the prostate gland. The seminal vesicles are responsible for the majority of the secretion. That is up to 60% of the semen is going to be produced in the seminal vesicles. And some of the important functions here of the seminal vesicles. And some of the important functions here of the seminal vesicles are they're responsible for the presence of the fructose in the semen. They're responsible for the fibrinogen, which is responsible for the clot. We have two things here. One is fibrinogen, two is present, lysine that is present in the semen for lysis of the clot. The lysine fibrinol in seminal vesicle secretions. The seminal vesicles are also responsible for the addition of the vitamin C and the prostaglandins in the semen. So roughly we can say that majority of the secretion of the semen will be actually from the seminal vesicles. Next slide, please. So before the seminal vesicles add their secretion into the ejaculatory duct, before that we'll be having the prostate gland. The prostate glands, even though occupying more space, it will be giving an addition of about 30% of the total semen. That is what exactly is a prostate gland. It is a collection of different small tubes and they're primarily responsible for maintaining the pH of the semen, and they are responsible for maintaining the motility. The motility of the semen, motility of the sperm, it primarily depends upon its pH. If the pH becomes lesser, that is, if it is going towards acidity, then the motility will be hampered, which will be leading to infertility. Hence, the pH maintenance is an important function that is done by the prostate gland. And they also secrete acid phosphatase and fibrinolysin. Fibrinolysin is responsible for the lysis of the clot of the semen, and they'll be containing acid phosphatase in their secretions. Next slide, please. Another important accessory reproductive organ that contributes to the semen, this is the bulbourethral glands. Now, the bulbourethral glands will be secreting mucus along with, and one of the very important addition that happens to the semen here in the bulbourethral gland is the enzyme hyaluronidase. Now, hyaluronidase is necessary for penetration of the oocytes by the sperm. Now, we'll be having this enzyme in the cap, in the acrosomal cap of the sperm, which is responsible for penetration into the oocyte. So, the sperm will be carrying a lot of journey up to about, it is viable even after about 48 to 72 hours even outside happening. This penetration is actually due to the presence of the enzyme hyaluronidase that is added because of the bulbourethral glands. Next slide, please. So these three glands, that is the prostate gland, the bulbourethral gland, and the seminal vesicles, along with the test secretion from the testis, that is the spermatozoa from the testis, will be constituting the majority of the semen. When we look at the specific gravity of the semen, if you look at the physical properties of the semen, it will be having a specific gravity of about 1.028. The volume may vary from about 2 to 5. The pH, it is always alkaline. It should always be alkaline in the range of about 7.3 to 7.6. Motility, even 60% motility will be good enough to cause fertilization. Sorry, not motility. When we look at the Morphology will be about 60% or motility will be about 3 millimeters per minute, and the count will be varying from about 50 to 200 million per cubic millimeter. Even up to 20 million per cubic millimeter will be enough for the causation of the fertilization, and anything less than that will be considered as a pathological count. Next slide, please. So, with respect to the count, it's also necessary that the student that are associated with the count. That is, whenever with the body or tail, that condition may be called as a teratospermia. Terato means here there is morphological or anatomical disturbance with the shape of the sperm, or sometimes there may be exospermia, which is characterized by lesser amount of the sperms, less than normal, that is less than 20 million. Or sometimes we may be having aspermia, where there is reduction. The technical terms associated with the male reproductive system also needs, or the morphology of the sperms. When we look at the structure of a sperm, as you see in the picture here, it consists of a head, it consists of a neck, it consists of a middle piece or the body, and it consists of a tail that is like a flagellum. Since it has a significant speed of about 3 millimeter per minute, it comes due to the movement that are given by the flagellum, and all this movement, it requires a lot of energy, and this energy is because the middle piece is loaded with the mitochondrium, and the penetration force, this comes here in the acrosome. This acrosomal cap that we see here in the diagram will be containing the enzyme hyaluronidase. This hyaluronidase is responsible for the penetration followed by the fertilization. Next slide, please. So, sperm with the proper morphology should be having the similar characteristics. But for process of spermatogenesis, that is, initially there will be immature spermatozoa that will be present in the germ layer of the testis. Later, due to the influence of the testosterone, they will be undergoing a stage of spermatogenesis, after which it becomes a mature sperm. Next slide, please. So this process, wherein a spermatozoa matures itself into an adult sperm, this is called as spermatogenesis. Now, as we can see in the picture here, there will be a spermatogonia. This spermatogonia will be undergoing a mitotic division. Mitotic division means it is a multiplicative division. That is, there is going to be no separation between your two sets of chromosomes, X and Y chromosomes. It will be a multiplicative division, and this multiplicative division will be followed by two sets of meiotic divisions. Meiotic divisions are the reduction divisions. Here the diploid spermatozoa will be converted into a haploid cell. Now, these two meiotic divisions will lead to the formation of a spermatid, and the spermatid develops into an adult sperm. Now, here we can remember that the spermatid to adult sperm, this connect between a spermatid and adult sperm, this process is called as spermiogenesis. Spermatid to the sperm, it is called as spermiogenesis. Next slide, please. So this constitutes the male reproductive system. When we look at the female reproductive system, here we can see two type of structures here. That is, one is the gonads, as we see in male reproductive system, are the cells that produce the gamete. Here it is the ovary, and it consists of internal genitalia and external genitalia. The internal genitalia constitutes the vagina, the uterus, the fallopian tubes, and the ovaries, whereas the external genitalia, it will be consisting of the labia majora, labia minora, clitoris, vestibule, and the vestibular glands. Next slide, please. When we look at the anatomy of the uterus, looking at each of the organs of the reproductive system, we see that the uterus consists of three parts, that is the fundus, the body, and the cervix. The cervix is a dilation that we see, and fundus is the upper dome shaped portion that is present in the uterus, and the body is where the fertilized implantation is going to be happening. Now we can see three layers that are present in the uterus. That is, one is the serous layer, one is the myome layer, and one is the that are lined along the column. Next slide, please. Now, another structure or the primary structure of the reproductive system here is the ovary. Now, what are ovaries? Ovaries are the flattened ovoid bodies that are bilaterally on both sides, bilaterally below the fallopian tubes, and they consist of an outer cortex and an inner medulla. The cortex consists of a germinal epithelium below the tunica albuginea, and the ovarian follicles will be present here inside the cortex. Now, the ovarian follicles are many in number. Many in number means during the birth will be 4 lakhs or 400,000 ovarian follicles that will be scattered all around the cortex. Now, these follicles will be undergoing maturation in stages like primordial follicle, primary follicle, vesicular follicle, and Graafian follicle. Now, these stages of various development or maturation of these follicles takes place under the influence of the reproductive hormones. Now, here, if you look into the picture here, we can see the follicles that are present in the various stages of the development. This is all present here in the cortex. Next slide, please. Hormones that are responsible for the proliferation or they're responsible for the development. The primordial follicles, the primordial follicles are extremely small, about 15 to 20 mu or 15 to 20 micrometer in their diameter, whereas the fourth stage of the follicle, that is a Graafian follicle, is about 10 to 12 millimeter in diameter. So we can see that there is roughly more than 1,000 times expansion that happens in the primordial follicle till the stage of the Graafian follicle. And this journey between the primordial follicle and the Graafian follicle, there will be so many structural changes that will be happening inside the follicle before it becomes a mature follicle. We'll see what are the structural changes one by one. Now, from the primordial follicle, we can see that the primordial follicle will swell into a primary follicle, which will further swell into a vesicular follicle, which will further swell into a mature Graafian follicle. We can see that as it reaches the vesicular stage, here the follicular cavity becomes enlarged and it gets distended with the fluid. That is called as follicular fluid. The zona pellucida becomes thicker, and when it reaches the Graafian follicle stage, we find that there is the development of corona radiata and theca interna prominently around the Graafian follicle. Next picture. Next slide, please. So as it reaches the stage of the Graafian follicle, back the Graafian follicle. So when it reaches the stage of the Graafian follicle, we can see that various structural changes happen within a ovarian follicle. When we look at the different structural changes, we can see that this nucleus, the central nucleus that we are seeing in a picture, this will be centrally located in the earlier stages of the Graafian follicle, that is primary and primordial follicle. As it reaches the vesicular follicle and till the Graafian follicle, we can see that the nucleus, we can see that the ovum, this comes closer to the periphery. This comes closer to the periphery because it needs to be expelled out of the follicle. So this ovum which is present here, this will be much more peripherally placed as the cell becomes bigger and bigger. We can see that the cavity that is present here surrounding the ovum, this will be becoming more and more bigger. This cavity is called as antral cavity, or it is called as follicular cavity. It is consisting of the fluid called as follicular fluid. This follicular fluid, it is responsible for giving proper nourishment to this ovum, so that this ovum will be sustaining itself with the help of the nourishment given by the follicular fluid. And we can see this layer of zona pellucida, a radiation, different radiation called as corona radiata. Corona radiata cells are cells that are having long extremities that connect your zona pellucida to the ovum. What is the purpose? The purpose is again giving proper nutrition and giving proper structural support for the development of the ovum. So these are the structural things that one needs to remember as far as the ovum is concerned. And as it reaches the final stage of the Graafian follicle, we can see that it will be further peripherally located, and it will attach itself. It will attach itself to the wall. It will attach itself to the wall of the ovarian follicle, and it will protrude out. It will protrude out of the ovarian follicle, and through a structure, it will be that protrusion will be called as stigma. Stigma means it will be protrusion of the ovum that will be coming out of the ovarian follicle. So as the follicle goes to the different stages of the development, we can see that internally also there will be so many changes that will be happening within the ovarian follicle. And this follicle will be responsible for secretory activities also. That is, estrogen gets secreted from the ovarian follicles, which will be having an impact over the positive feedback mechanism that is needed for the secretion of the luteinizing hormone. Next slide, please. Now, this estrogen that will be giving a positive feedback mechanism to the luteinizing hormone, which will lead to the secretion of the extra amount of the luteinizing hormone. And we can see that there is an increase of two hormones, that is LH and estrogen, and this is particularly characterized by the increase in the basal body temperature. There may be close to half to 1 degree in increase in the basal body temperature, and once the Graafian follicle reaches itself to the periphery, and once it ruptures, there is going to be follicular fluid that is going to be oozing out of the ruptured Graafian follicle, and the ovum is going to be expelled into the abdominal cavity. Even further after the ovulation, the ovum will be viable for about 24 to 48 hours, or till the fertilization is going to be takes place, whichever is going to be earlier. Next slide, please. Now here, along with the ovulation, or along with the giving out of the ovum, the ovary is also responsible for the secretion of two important hormones, that is the estrogen and the progesterone. Now this estrogen is secreted in the theca interna and granulosa cells of the ovarian follicles. We can see these two layers that are present in the outside of the ovarian follicle. That is one, the external one is the theca externa. This is responsible for the secretion of the. Some amount of estrogen can also be secreted from the adrenal cortex. The sex steroids that are secreted from the zona reticularis of the adrenal cortex also give out estrogen to some extent. Placenta can also be secreting the estrogen to some extent, but primarily it is secreted from the theca interna of the ovarian follicles. And what are the physiological effects of the estrogen over the body? The estrogen will be responsible for the increase in the blood supply to the uterine endometrium, and for the enlargement of the uterus. We can see that after every menstrual cycle, there is going to be desquamation of the uterine endometrium, and this uterine endometrium that gets desquamated needs to be again replenished during every cycle. And this replenishment of the uterine endometrium will be requiring proper secretion of the estrogen. Estrogen is also responsible for the secondary sexual characteristics in females. It is responsible for the increase in the number of the epithelial cells that are present in the fallopian tubes. Over the cardiovascular system, it will be having a vasodilatory effect over the vessels of the uterus. Estrogen is also responsible for the deposition of the fats in certain areas, particularly that is in areas of the buttock, breasts, and subcutaneous tissue. Estrogen also has an effect of water retention. It leads osteoblastic activity. It will be responsible for growth spurt during the puberty time, because as the estrogen is secreted, osteoblasts are going to be increased, and osteoblasts will be responsible for the linear development of the bones. And we have seen that the follicular stimulating hormone is primarily responsible for the proliferation of follicles, but along with that, the estrogen too has a role to play as far as the proliferation of the ovarian follicles is concerned. Next slide, please. The water retention and the sodium are interrelated with one another, because when the water is retained in the body, due to the concentration gradient, when sodium is retained in the body, the water too gets retained in the body. The second hormone that gets secreted from the ovary, that is the progesterone. Now the progesterone is also secreted from the theca interna, just like the estrogen is secreted, the progesterone also gets secreted, and the work of the progesterone is the preparation of the uterus and mammary glands for proper pregnancy and lactation. Progesterone enhances the secretory activity in the uterine endometrium. It promotes the secretory activities in the mucosal lining of the fallopian tubes, and it is responsible for the growth of the duct system in the mammary glands that are responsible for the lactation later on. The progesterone also increases the thickness of the cervical mucosa, and it has a thermogenic temperature gets reduced, because the progesterone will be completely reduced. That will be responsible for menstruation. But whenever progesterone is there, it will be having a thermogenic action over the body. Next slide, please. Now, where does progesterone get secreted in the body? Progesterone gets secreted primarily from the ovaries, but we can also see that a large amount of progesterone is secreted from the corpus luteum, that is a disintegrated Graafian follicle. This will be forming a yellow body, yellow glandular body called as a corpus luteum. And this is responsible for the secretion of the progesterone, which is responsible for maintaining the pregnancy. Progesterone is also secreted from the placenta, that will be completely active from about 3 months after the fertilization. So there are three basic sources of the progesterone, but the most important one, the primary one, is the ovaries, followed by the corpus luteum. Now, these hormones, the ultimate aim of these hormones is fertilization. And this fertilization cycle, it happens in a cyclical manner, that is called as a menstrual cycle. Now, what is menstrual cycle? These are the cyclical events taking place in a rhythmic manner during reproductive phase, which is called as a menstrual cycle. The duration, it's about 28 days. At times, we can be seeing slight variation in those days, and we may be terming it as pathological only if it crosses about 21, if it's within 21 days or crosses 35 days consistently. On an average, about 28 days, the changes are with respect to the uterus, with respect to the vagina, or with respect to the cervix. We'll see all these changes one by one in the next slide. So when we look at the different changes that are happening in the during the menstrual cycle, we can divide them into different events based on what changes are happening. Now, in the ovary, the events are called as follicular phase, secretory phase, and menstrual phase. Because day 1 to 5, most of the events will be happening with respect to the uterus itself, because there will be discoimation of the uterine endometrium and there will be bleeding. And the primary events that are happening in the ovaries will be from the day 5 to day 14, that is called as follicular phase. This phase is when the ovarian follicles, they'll be undergoing maturation from the primary follicle to the vesicular follicle or the secondary follicle, till the one of them develops to reach the Graafian follicle stage. So these changes will be coming under the follicular phase. After the ovulation, that is after the 14th day, the 15th day to 20th day is called as secretory phase. The secretory phase, the primary changes will be happening with respect to the uterus. This will be involving the preparation of the uterus for the implantation of the fertilized. Next slide, please. So here we can see that we'll be using a word proliferative phase with respect to the changes that are happening in the uterus, and we'll be using the word follicular phase with respect to the changes that are happening within the ovary. Now, for a longer question, if one has to answer, you can divide the ovarian changes, and we can write there as a follicular phase, and you can write uterine changes, and you can write proliferative phase based on the duration that one has. Here I'll summarize both of them together as a proliferative phase with respect to the uh, uh, uterus, and the follicular phase with respect to the ovary. Now, in uterus, what is going to be happening is there is going to be regeneration of the uterine endometrium. That is the disfemated endometrium of the uterus, the inner layer of the uterus. This is going to be regenerated, and this regeneration will be happening by the appearance of the newer blood vessels that appear in the stroma of the uterus. There is going to be development of the uterine glands within the endometrial stroma. And in ovaries, what is going to be happening is the primordial follicle becomes a primary, becomes a secondary, and becomes a Graafian follicle. So there are two-fold changes that happen within the day 5 to day 14th of the menstrual cycle. We call that as a proliferative phase, or we call that as a follicular phase. Once the proliferative phase comes to an end, that is, once we reach the 14th day of the cycle, we go into the next stage of the ovulation. We can see that here the Graafian follicle, there will be rupturing, and there will be releasing of the ovum along with the follicular fluid into the abdominal cavity. Next slide, please. And this will be leading to the formation of the corpus luteum. Now, the corpus luteum, whatever is disintegrated out of the Graafian follicle, this will be forming a yellow body, yellow glandular body, that is called as the corpus luteum. And this corpus luteum becomes a temporary endocrine gland. This temporary endocrine, it behaves like a temporary endocrine gland. It secretes progesterone, which will be responsible for bringing about secretory changes in the uterus. Now, what this progesterone that is secreted in the corpus luteum does is that it causes development, increase in the secretory activities of the uterine endometrium. Now, what happens to the Graafian follicle that is ruptured? Now, the ruptured Graafian follicle, it is getting filled up with the blood after ovulation, and this ruptured follicle that is filled up with the blood, that is called as corpus hemorrhagicum, which later on, which further disintegrate. This the corpus luteum, and if it is later on, no fertilization takes place, it becomes corpus albicans. So we can see in the corpus luteum, certain changes will be happening post ovulation. That changes are called as luteinization. The granulosa cells and the theca interna cells, they develop into granulosa lutein cells and theca lutein cells. Now, what are these granulosa cells and theca interna cells? If we recall, we found that these are the cells that secreted the estrogen and the progesterone before the ovulation. Now, here we can find that they'll change themselves, they'll luteinize themselves, and they'll again become secretory. They'll become secretory in nature. They'll be converted into granulosa lutein cells and theca lutein cells to a process called as luteinization. Next slide, please. Now, as the progesterone is getting secreted, the endometrial glands become more tortuous, and there will be deposition of the glycogen and the lipids in the stromal cells that are associated with the endometrium. This is followed by the increase in the blood supply to the uterine endometrium, and the thickness of endometrium far increases, it increases up to 6 millimeter. So all these changes that are happening in the uterine endometrium will be under the influence of the progesterone that is secreted from the corpus luteum. Next slide, please. And mainly secretes progesterone, and the corpus luteum remains active till the third month of pregnancy, after which placenta takes over. If there is no fertilization taking place, then it will disintegrate into corpus luteum menstrualis, and further it will disintegrate into corpus luteum albicans. Here we can see that there is corpus luteum, there is corpus hemorrhagicum, there is corpus luteum menstrualis, and there is corpus luteum albicans, based on which different stage that is presented. If the fertilization takes place, your corpus luteum will be required for a little bit more longer of time, after which the placenta takes over all the functions that are happening under the corpus luteum. Next slide, please. So why this? Okay, okay, we have discussed this. So we can see that the high level of estrogen, that causes the estrogen causes a surge in the luteinizing hormone. That is called as a positive feedback mechanism. This is one example for the two type positive feedback mechanism. Now this luteinizing hormone will be keeping on increasing till a rupture of the Graafian follicle will be happening. There will be increase of the blood supply to the follicle, and the follicle swells and protrudes along the surface of the ovary. We have discussed earlier that the swelling of the follicle and coming out from the surface of the ovary through a structure called as stigma. And this into the abdominal cavity. So next slide, please. So just like we saw in the case of the spermatogenesis, that the maturation of the primary spermatozoa into an adult sperm, here the oogonium, or the immature reproductive gamete, this will also be undergoing a first mitotic division or multiplicative division. It will be undergoing change as a primary oocyte, which will further develop into a secondary oocyte through a meiotic division, and the second meiotic division will be leading to a fertilized egg or the ovum. So this is the process of oogenesis. Next slide, please. So once we have completed the follicular phase, once we have completed the ovulation phase, once we have completed the secretory phase, the final phase will be remaining is the menstrual phase. The menstrual phase, while counting the days, will count this as a day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But studying will study it as a last stage, because this happens when the corpus luteum is no longer active. Now, if there is no fertilization happening, the corpus luteum will become inactive and it will disintegrate as corpus albicans. Hence, the progesterone secretion is stopped. And if there is no progesterone secretion happening, then there is going to be desquamation of the uterine endometrium, and there will be shedding of uterine endometrium along with the blood and tissue fluid. So, what are the causes of menstruation? So, this happens due to the sudden involution of the endometrium due to the lack of prostaglandin that causes vasoconstriction of the endometrial cells. So, this hypoxia, or this lack of oxygen along the endometrial cells, will ensure that they'll be undergoing necrosed, or they'll be dying, they'll die, and they'll be shed along with the blood. The fibrinolysin is also secreted in the expelled blood. So this sees that there is no clot that are seen in the menstrual fluid. Next slide, please. Because all the clots that are there, they're already going to be lysed with the help of a fibrinolysin. Here we can see that during the 28 days, the hormones will be completely different based on their own functions. The luteinizing hormone will see a surge, or a LH surge will be happening only during the ovulation, and rest of the days we can say that it will be almost all flat. The estrogen, we can see this purple color estrogen here, we can see that the increase happens just before the ovulation, because this is responsible for the development of the secondary follicle into the Graafian follicle, and later on it decreases after the ovulation. Again, the corpus luteum starts secreting estrogen, so it will be having a further increase, and if the menstruation takes place, it is going to be coming down again. The progesterone, we can see that it will be completely flatter till about the 14th or 15th day, and only after the corpus luteum is going to be formed, it takes a surge, and it will be responsible for bringing about the changes and maintaining the pregnancy. The follicular hormone, it is primarily required in the first phase, that is for the follicular phase, for the increase of the secretory phase or the secretory changes in the uterine endometrium. Next slide, please. So this brings to an end of the menstrual cycle. And if there is fertilization, only if there is fertilization, there will be a next thing coming into the picture, that is the placenta. Now the placenta will be formed in about 10 or 15 days, but will be becoming completely active at the completion of about 3 months of pregnancy. The primary work of the placenta is the secretion of the estrogen and progesterone for the sustenance of pregnancy. It also secretes two other hormone called as HCG and HCS. If you recall, this HCG is responsible for the morning sickness or for the vomiting episodes that are seen in early pregnancy. This itself is the test that is done for testing of the pregnancy, also the presence of the human gonadotropin. It also secretes relaxin. Placenta secretes relaxin that is responsible for the dilatation of the cervix and relaxation of the pelvic ligaments in order to accommodate the growing fetus. Along with this, the respiration of the fetus takes place due to the diffusion of the oxygen through placenta. That is, the placenta also has a respiratory function and it has an excretory function, because the only way in which the fetus is going to excrete will be through placenta. The only way in which the fetus will be getting nourishment and nutrition will be through placenta. So we can see that placenta does reproductive, placenta does excretory function, it does respiratory function, it is responsible for the dilatation of the cervix, multiple functions which are responsible for the development of the fetus and for the sustenance of the fetus within the uterine cavity will be undertaken by the placenta. Next slide, please. So once the placenta is there and once the fertilization has happened, once the parturition has happened, the next stage that will be required here will be the lactation. Lactation or the milk secretion that will be responsible for the nourishment the post parturition. So we can see that the lactation will be happening due to the development of the breast system, duct system, that will be happening due to the secretion of the primarily progesterone, along with that the HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, and prolactin and estrogen. We can see that the prolactin increases after about 5th month of the pregnancy, and it will be peaking up during the picking up post pregnancy. There will be development of the lactation after about 5th month of pregnancy and completely increase in the blood in the milk secretion post the parturition or post the delivery. Next slide, please. And this lactation is another example that can be given. Milk ejection, this is another example that can be used as an example for positive feedback mechanism. So this milk ejection, this happens due to the suckling reflex. This happens due to a mechanical reflex, suckling reflex. That will be giving a sensory input to the hypothalamus, and hypothalamus will be acting over both posterior pituitary and the anterior pituitary. What posterior pituitary will be studying it in the next phase. Here, what it will be doing it will be secreting an hormone called as oxytocin that will be responsible for the contraction of the uterus and also for causing the expulsion of the milk or ejection of the milk. And it will be also stimulating the anterior pituitary that secretes the prolactin, which is responsible for the milk production. So be it milk production or be it milk ejection, what is required here is a suckling reflex that is developed by the suckling of the breast by the neonate, which will be responsible for stimulating the hypothalamus for causing both ejection and for causing both production. Next slide, please. So this complete reproductive system and the male reproductive system. Now quickly let us glance through some of the endocrine glands we have seen. In the introductory portion, we saw that we have different type of hormones. We have different type of endocrine glands that are either protein hormones or that are made up of tyrosine or that are made up of steroid hormones. Now, all these hormones, they will be secreted to certain important endocrine glands in the body, and the most important one of them will be the pituitary gland. Now, the pituitary gland, this is a very minute gland. It will be hardly about 0.5 gram in weight, and it will be present in the cella turcica of the sphenoid bone, and it will be connected to the hypothalamus through pituitary stalk. Here we can see that there is a connection between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland through the hypothalamo-hypophyseal axis. Another name of the pituitary gland is the hypophysis. It consists of two structures, that is the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. We can divide that in anterior and posterior pituitary. Next slide, please. So the anterior pituitary will be responsible for 6 type of hormonal secretion, and the posterior pituitary will be responsible for 2 type of hormonal secretions. Next slide, please. Now, the one of the hormones that is secreted by a type of cell anterior pituitary called as the somatotrophs. The somatotrophs are responsible for the secretion of the growth hormone, and this particular will be responsible for secretion of the growth hormone, and this growth hormone will be responsible for bringing about various changes that are associated with the repair and growth function of the body. Now, the pituitary glands, they are in a large manner, they are controlled by the hypothalamus. There are certain regulatory hormones that are secreted from the hypothalamus that are responsible for controlling the pituitary gland. We can see that we can see that there is an hormone from the hypothalamus called as growth hormone releasing hormone, the GHRH. It will be responsible for the release of the growth hormone from the hypothalamus. Next slide, please. So the growth hormone inhibiting hormone will be responsible for the negative balance or the negative feedback mechanism of the balancing the growth hormone. The next sort of hormone released from the hypothalamus is the TRH or the corticotrophin releasing hormone, followed by RH or the gonadotrophin releasing hormone, and the PIH or the prolactin inhibiting hormone. So we can see that these 6 type of hormones released on the hypothalamus will be controlling all the activities of the pituitary gland. Next slide, please. Now, the growth hormone has multiple effects over the body. It is released on the somatotrophs, and its primary work is growth and repair. Now, how does it bring about the growth and repair? Now, it stimulates the osteoblasts and chondrocytes of the bones. Now, this brings about a growth in the body, and it brings about a repair in the body wherever there is any injury. How injury will be healed, how there will be muscle growth. This is because there is increase of protein synthesis in the body, and there will be increased amino acid transpose inside the cell membrane, and increased RNA translation that will be happening within the cell, that leads to the repair function of the with respect to the restoration or repair function that will be happening in the body. Growth hormone is also responsible for inhibiting protein catabolism, that is, it reduces any destruction of the proteins that are taking place in the body. The growth hormone increases glycogenesis in the cells. It increases the decreases the peripheral utilization of the glucose. In other words, whatever the glucose is there, it will be converted in the glycogen, it will be stored in the cell rather getting used in the body. And it is here we can recall that just like your erythropoietin, just like your thyroid hormones, another precursor for erythropoiesis is the growth hormone. And growth hormone has an effect over the plasma calcium by increasing the plasma calcium. it increases the ECF volume and increases the sodium retention in the body. That is, if sodium is retained, the water is retained. If water is retained, the ECF volume in the body increases. We can see that there's a large amount of action that will be seen by growth hormone over the various structures of the body. Now, the second hormone that is present from the thyroid gland is the thyroid stimulating hormone, or the TSH. The TSH is primarily responsible for stimulating the synthesis of the thyroglobulin within the follicular cells of the thyroid gland. Now, the thyroglobulin is responsible for the formation of the thyroid hormones. Hence, the thyroid stimulating hormone will be controlling all the secretory activities of the thyroid gland. Next slide, please. Now, the third hormone, that is the third hormone is the adrenocorticotropic hormone, which increases the blood supply to the adrenal cortex, which sees that the structural integrity of the cortex is maintained and proper secretion will be happening from the adrenal cortex. Another hormone that is secreted from the pituitary gland is a follicular stimulating hormone. We saw during the reproductive system, we saw that FSH is responsible for the genesis in males. Spermiogenesis, where the spermatid develops into a adult sperm. So that is by the spermiogenesis, and spermatogenesis is due to the testosterone. Spermiogenesis due to the follicular stimulating hormone, and it stimulates the theca cells of the Graafian follicle. Now, what are the theca cells? We saw that in a follicle we have two external layers. There is a theca interna and there is a theca externa. So it stimulates the theca, particularly the theca interna cells, in order to secrete the estrogen. Next slide, please. So next hormone that comes under the pituitary gland is the luteinizing hormone. We have discussed briefly this in the reproductive system also. It is called as interstitial cell stimulating hormone because it stimulates the Leydig cells to secrete testosterone. It promotes the secretion of the progesterone from the corpus luteum, and it is also stimulating the ovulation. In fact, LH surge is the primary activity that is responsible for the ovulation. Next slide, please. The next hormone that is secreted uh, from the pituitary gland is adrenocorticotropic hormone. The one of the main activity that ACTH does is that it causes the mobilization of the fats in the body, which is called as adipokinetic effect, and it also makes utilization of the fats for energy, which leads to the production of the ketone bodies. That is called as ketogenic effect. What is ketogenic effect? Ketogenic effect means whenever energy, ketone bodies are produced only when fat is utilized for energy. So when ACTH is secreted in larger quantity, fats are utilized for more energy production. That is called as a ketogenic effect. And the ADH secretion is also controlled due to the feedback from the corticotrophic releasing hormone from the anterior pituitary. Next slide, please. The next hormone that is released from the posterior pituitary, this is the antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone or vasopressin has two type of effect. One peculiarity of this particular hormone is it is produced from the hypothalamus, that is the supraoptic nucleus, and the paraventricular nucleus of the hypothalamus will be responsible for the production of the uh, vasopressin, whereas it is stored in the axon terminals of the posterior pituitary. This is a type of hormone wherein it is produced in hypothalamus but stored in the axon terminals, and later on from the posterior pituitary it is released. What action it does over the body is that it increases the water permeability in the collecting duct by increasing the aquaporin protein channels. Now, aquaporin protein channels are the channels that are responsible for causing the permeability of the water in the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. Now, the ADH, this increases the process, ensures that water gets absorbed into the body as an action of the ADH. Now, vasopressin also causes an absorption of urea in the collecting duct by promoting facilitated diffusion, and it also has an effect over the blood vessels. That is, it causes the vasoconstriction. Hence, its name is vasopressin. Next slide, please. Now, ADH, this is controlled primarily to the renin-angiotensin mechanism. That is the end point of the renin-angiotensin mechanism is the secretion of ADH. If you recall why renin-angiotensin mechanism happens, this is because there is fall in BP. This is because there is fall in blood volume. So we need a condition where more water is absorbed from the kidneys so that the blood volume is increased, so that the BP is increased. So a way in which renin-angiotensin acts is by increasing the production of the anti-diuretic hormone so that water content in the body is increased. So how ADH is controlled in the body? It is through the renin-angiotensin mechanism. ADH secretion is increased so that there is an increase of BP. And ADH also has a regulatory effect due to the changes in osmolality and the changes in the ECF, which will regulate the secretion of the ADH. If you find that there is a significant changes in the osmolality of the blood, this will be regulating the changes in osmolality of the extracellular fluid and the renin-angiotensin mechanism. Next slide, please. And osmoreceptors of the body play a crucial role in this control. The second hormone of the posterior pituitary is the oxytocin. Now, the oxytocin is produced by the supraoptic nucleus and paraventricular nucleus of the hypothalamus, similar to the ADH, and it is stored in the dilated nerve terminals of the posterior pituitary. This will be causing milk ejection by causing contraction of the myoepithelial cells that will be leading to milk ejection. And it will be also responsible for causing the uterine contraction that will be facilitating the parturition or the expulsion of the fetus. And in the males, the oxytocin has an action of promoting the transportation of sperms in the males by causing rhythmic contraction of the uterus. The sperms will be having a motility, but this motility or this transportation of the sperms, this will be caused due to the contraction of the uterus that happens even in a non-pregnant women. Even in a non-pregnant women, oxytocin has a role to play as far as the transportation of the sperms within the reproductive system is concerned. Next slide, please. So some of the applied aspects of the pituitary gland, we can see various diseases like gigantism, acromegaly, dwarfism, diabetes, insipidus, might be caused due to the hypo and Next slide, please. We can skip this portion. There are multiple more glands remaining. So we'll go on to the next gland. The second gland, this is the thyroid gland. So thyroid gland, this is located in the neck region and it has two lobes that are connected through a central connection called as isthmus. The next slide, please. We can see that the two lobes will be connected by a central structure and they'll be containing follicular cells. Structurally, the thyroid gland contains follicular cells which will be responsible for the secretion of three type of hormones, that is the T3, T4 and T3, T4 and calcitonin, the triiodothyronine, the tetraiodothyronine and the calcitonin. Next slide, please. Now the thyroid hormone synthesis, it happens in different stages. Now the first thing that is required for the thyroid hormone formation is the thyroglobulin synthesis. Now follicular cells in the thyroid, they synthesize a large glycoprotein called as thyroglobulin. Now we can recall that the thyroid stimulating hormone, the TSH, plays an important role as far as the thyroglobulin synthesis is concerned. This is followed by iodide trapping within the thyroid gland through the sodium iodine symport mechanism. That is, there is absorption of a positively charged sodium and a negatively charged, and that is within the thyroglobulin. This process is called as iodine. This is followed by the oxidation of the iodide to the iodine. So once the iodide is oxidized into iodine, there will be development of the thyroid hormones, that is monoiodothyronine and diiodothyronine, that is MIT and DIT. Now this MIT and DIT, they combine to give triiodothyronine and tetraiodothyronine, and this process of combination is called as coupling reactions. Through to these 5 different stages, we can see that. Next slide, please. The thyroid hormones are produced in the body. Now, thyroid hormone too has multiple functions over the body. The primary function here will be the action over the basal metabolic rate. It will be responsible for the increase of the basal metabolic rate. It will be responsible for the increase of the cellular metabolism, and it is responsible for the increase in the growth, the cognition, the brain cognition, the behavioral changes in a person, the memory. They are all happening due to the function of the thyroid hormones, and it has particular effects over the carbohydrate, proteins, and fats. That is, thyroid hormone increase the availability of the glucose, increase the availability of the proteins, and they increase the availability of the fatty acids due to the fact that it increases the metabolism within a cell. We can see that thyroid hormones will be causing an increase in the motility of the GI tract, loose motions, and in hypothyroidism there may be constipation. So why? Because the primary function of the thyroid hormone is in a nature to increase the motility of the GI tract. The thyroid hormones are responsible for the thermogenic action. When we look at the hypothyroidism, we see that there will be chills or there will be feeling of cold for a person, because the thyroid hormones are responsible for maintaining the body temperature. We can see that thyroid hormone has an action over the RS and CVS, that is the respiratory system and the cardiovascular system. It increases the heart rate, it increases the respiratory rate, and increases the functionality of the cardiovascular system, which is responsible for maintaining the increased metabolic rate. And thyroid hormone also has to play a role in erythropoiesis and hemopiosis, just like erythropoietin does the work, and just like growth hormone does that work. Next slide, please. So one of the next gland that comes into picture is the adrenal gland. Next slide, which divides into adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla. Firstly, going into the adrenal cortex, it histologically composed of 3 layers. That is zona glomerulosa, which secretes aldosterone, 11-deoxycorticosterone. The second layer is the zona reticularis, that secretes glucocorticoids, primarily that is cortisol, corticosterone, and cortisone. And lastly, the zona fasciculata, that is responsible for secretion of the sex with little amount of progesterone. So when we look at the function of each of these hormones, that is glucocorticoids that are secreted from zona fasciculata of the adrenal cortex, they are primarily called as a stress hormone because they are meant for increase of the glucose levels in the body. So they mobilize glucose by promoting gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis is a process by which glucose is produced from alternate sources, that is the proteins. So production of the glucose takes place from the proteins. There is increased availability of the glucose. There is glycogen that is broken down by glycogenolysis, which will be increasing the glucose levels in the body. That is responsible for management of the stress. Glucocorticoids reduce the glucose uptake by the cells, which is again a reason why glucose further increases in the body. And they have an anti-inflammatory effect and anti-allergic effect. So they prevent the release of histamine and formation of mast cells. Now, histamines are released from the mast cells whenever there is allergy or whenever there is hypersensitivity. Whenever the body fights against any allergy, it produces histamines. Now, the glucocorticoids, they cut down the histamine production in the body, which leads to the reduction of the allergic effects in the body. And it breaks down the proteins. It breaks down proteins and produces glucose. It stimulates the secretion of the pepsin and the HCl in the stomach. We can see that glucocorticoids can cause gastritis, or they can cause acidity in the stomach because they have an action over the stomach mucosa. They call it as a stress hormone, and they promote bone resorption during the hypersecretion. That is, uh, the calcium that is present within the bones, it will be resorbed. It will be resorbed, and the calcium becomes plasma calcium level will be increased during the glucocorticoid secretion. So in hypersecretion, this may is also called weakness of the bones, because all the calcium that is present within the bones, that will be coming out into free plasma. Next slide, please. So along with the glucocorticoids, one of the next hormone that is produced in the adrenal cortex is the mineralocorticoids. The primary mineralocorticoids is the aldosterone. The aldosterone acts on the P cells of the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting tubules, and it promotes the reabsorption of the sodium, and by promoting the Na plus H plus pump, that is, it causes the absorption of the sodium, and it causes the liberation or excretion of the hydrogen. This is again responsible for the increase of the acidity of the urine, and in the sweat, it decreases the sodium excretion, and it regulates the Okay, sorry for the pause. There was a disconnect in the middle. So coming back to the mineralocorticoids, levels in the body and the blood volume in the body happens due to these mineralocorticoids. Next slide, please. And any reduction in the mineralocorticoids levels in the body may be leading to a disease called as Addison's disease, which will be characterized by mineral that is seen in the adrenal gland. This is the sex steroids that are secreted from the zona reticularis of the adrenal cortex. So primarily there is secretion of the dihydroepiandrosterone, androstenedione, and testosterone. Little amount of estrogen and progesterone also do get secreted as a part of the sex adrenal cortex. Next slide, please. So a gland within a gland, that is adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla, they'll be completely different as far as the secretion is concerned. Now adrenal medulla secrete the hormones that are derived from the amino acids catechol. Hence they're called as catecholamines. That is adrenaline, noradrenaline, and dopamine. These are the main cells that are responsible for the secretion of the catecholamines. Now, catecholamines are the catecholamines primarily have acceleratory effect in the body. They'll be leading to an increase in the respiratory rate. They'll be leading to an increase in the heart rate, and they're responsible for causing vasoconstriction. The catecholamines also cause an increase in the basal metabolic rate, just like we have the thyroid hormones doing the increase in the basal metabolic rate. Next slide, please. The catecholamines are responsible for the adrenaline and noradrenaline will be crucial as a functional aspect of the adrenal medulla. Now, as a part of the fight and activations will be seen in the body whenever a person is sympathetically activated. As a few examples, horripilation or the pupils, that is eyes becoming wider, as a contraction of the muscles, contraction of the blood vessels, contraction of the GI tract, reduced secretion of the GI tract. Multiple actions will be happening in the adrenaline that will all be coming under one heading as a fight or flight reaction. Whatever actions are happening to the stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system are all flight reaction is primarily executed due to the secretion of the adrenaline. Next slide, please. The adrenaline causes mobilization and making utilization of fats. The next gland is the pancreas. It is made up of islets of Langerhans, which will be constituting about 1% of the pancreas, that is the endocrine pancreas, and about 99% of the pancreas will be the in the picture here will be consisting of the 4 type of cells. Out of that, the important 2 will be the alpha cell. The beta cells of the pancreas. Now, the insulin will be having multiple effects over the body, over the different systems of the body. Now, some of the effects of the insulin over the system of the body will be that insulin promotes the movement of glucose from the ECF to the inside of a cell. That is, it is responsible for the transportation of the glucose. It is responsible for the conversion of the glucose into the form of glucose. So insulin does all the activities that promotes the reduction in the blood glucose levels inside the cell. Next slide, please. Insulin is also responsible for the growth and repair activities that is taking place in a cell along with growth hormone. We can see that whenever there is deficiency of insulin, there will be severe hampering of the activities that will be taking place in the body. Insulin increases the storage of protein. It has an action over the lipids by causing synthesis of fatty acids, and it reduces the plasma potassium, supporting entry of potassium into the cells. We can see that whenever uh, there is deficiency of insulin, there will be an increase of plasma potassium level, and it increases glycogen levels in the body are reduced, and they're either utilized, either taken in, or insulin hormone. Next slide, please. So the hormone that is completely antagonist to the insulin will be the glucagon, and most of the functions of the glucagon will be the next hormone that is coming today. Next slide, please. gland that will be coming today will be the pineal gland. It's a very small gland that is located in the diencephalic area of the brain above hypothalamus. It is made up of two type of cells, that is the parenchymal cells and the neuroglial cells, and it is responsible for the secretion of the melatonin, which is responsible for maintaining the sleep wake cycle, which is responsible for maintaining the biological rhythms in the body, and which is responsible for the maintenance of the cycle in certain species of animals. The last slide, please. Next and the last slide. So there are and there are many endocrine hormones that are secreted in the body that are secreted from structures that may be not particularly known as endocrine glands. For example, natriuretic polypeptide or ANP, that is responsible for increasing the GFR or the glomerular filtration rate, and that will be causing removal of water stretch in the atrial wall. Whenever there is increase in the blood volume, there is a stretch in the atrial wall. Whenever there is stretch in the atrial wall, we will be having the secretion of the ANP. This ensures that the water is this ensures that there is a diuretic effect over the body, which will cause removal of water from the body. There are certain other local hormones in the body produced like serotonin, that is called as endochromatin cells of the lungs, endochromatin cells of your GI tract. It has a vasoconstrictor action. It is a cardio accelerator, and most importantly, it is necessary for the regulation of the mood, regulation of the happiness, and regulation of the passion and behavior in a particular person. Histamines that are produced as an reaction to any allergic manifestation in the body, they are also a type of the local hormones. Prostaglandins are a type of local hormones. The histamines cause an increase in the gastric motility, and they'll be causing vasoconstriction followed by bronchial. So these local hormones may not be produced on the gland or a thyroid gland or the adrenal gland, but since these hormones also act as chemical messengers, bringing about certain change in the function as different chemical messengers, and they'll be called as hormones. In the list of local hormones, we can easily add some 20-25 more hormones, and we can discuss regarding that. So one should also look into the various local hormones that are produced in the GI tract. That GI tract, for example, VIPs, for GI vasointestinal polypeptide. So gastrointestinal polypeptide. We can talk the secretin that is again produced in the GI tract. So we can see that multiple local hormones will be produced in the GI tract that will be affecting the motility or secretory aspect of the adjacent cells within the GI tract, altering their functions. These are a type of paracrine hormones. Paracrine hormones are those hormones which affect the activity of the cells that are nearer to that. Paracrine. These are hormones called as autocrine hormones. Autocrine hormones are those hormones that act upon themselves or that act upon a cell that produces the hormone. So those hormones are called as autocrine hormones. That are also called as neurohormones, that are they produced on the axon terminals. They act as neurotransmitters. Hormones, we need to look, or we need to study these hormones other than the conventional endocrine glands. Along with that, various local hormones too we'll need to be studying under the heading of the study of hormones or study of endocrine glands. So by that, I come to the end of today's session. Thank you, and all the best for your examinations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for the session. We are very glad to have you in this session today, sir. On behalf of our Panchajanya organization, we are very thankful to you, sir, for accepting our invitation to conduct the session today. The session will be definitely useful for the students, sir, for preparation of upcoming exams. Once again, thank you so much, sir. We'll wind up the session now, sir. We'll end the session now, sir. Thank you, sir.